canvas, a lie, and a truth too powerful to hide under the lights of live television. The afternoon sun spilled across the city like liquid gold, softening the hard edges of buildings and turning the streets into a living canvas. The air buzzed with life vendors, shouting the prices of roasted peanuts and spice corn, the sizzling aroma of food carts drifting through the warm breeze. Children darted between adults, their laughter mingling with the impatient honking of cars. Music poured out of a corner shop radio, a jazz tune blending effortlessly with the rhythm of footsteps on the pavement. It was the kind of day where the city didn't feel like a place made of brick and glass, but a heartbeat, steady and alive, on one of those sunlit corners. Beneath a mural of bold colors painted by unknown hands stood Malik. He was a young black artist, slender and quiet, with an intensity in his eyes that betrayed the storm of ideas swirling inside him. The world often overlooked him, but the canvas did not. The canvas always listened. A large sheet of paper was taped to the brick wall before him, its white surface catching the light of the descending sun. With one hand steady and the other moving in confident sweeps, Malik painted. His brush glided, as if guided by something beyond sight. Each stroke carried a rhythm of its own, measured, deliberate, yet flowing with an energy that felt untamed. His movements were not rushed, nor were they tentative. They were honest, pulled from a place in his chest that few dared to look into. Passers-by slowed down when they noticed him. Some stopped completely, forming a small semicircle around his makeshift studio. There was no stage, no spotlight, only the glow of the evening sun and the quiet authority of his talent. Strangers whispered to one another, marveling at the way his painting came alive. Children, still clutching melting ice creams, pointed at the image forming under his brush, a human figure, both ancient and futuristic, its eyes wide with untold stories, its skin adorned with symbols that hinted at heritage and mystery. Malik didn't notice their stares. His focus was absolute. For him, the act of painting was not a performance, it was survival, release, prayer. He dipped his brush in a jar of diluted paint, his hands stained in permanent shades of blue and red, and kept going. The sweat on his forehead gleamed like tiny crystals. But he did not wipe it away. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere between past and future, memory and dream. Now and then, a stranger would step forward to buy a small sketch from the pile he kept at his feet. The sketches were quick, raw, and intimate faces of people he had seen on buses, glimpses of the city in motion, fragments of his own imagination. He sold them for only a few dollars, never daring to ask for more. Some buyers handed him extra coins out of pity, others out of admiration, but Malik never asked for charity. He smiled faintly, muttered a soft thank you, and returned to his work. Though surrounded by the chaos of the street, Malik seemed untouchable, encased in a quiet dignity that couldn't be shaken. His clothes were simple, worn at the edges, his sneakers dulled by years of use. There was nothing glamorous about him, no polished presentation, no designer labels. And yet, there was something magnetic about the way he stood, brush in hand, painting as if the world might end, and this was the last story he'd ever get to tell. As the sun slid lower, shadows stretched across the pavement, but the light still clung to Malik's canvas. The colors he laid down shimmered under it, deep oranges, endless blues, and streaks of crimson that seemed to breathe. People who lingered along felt something stirring in them, a quiet ache they couldn't explain. His art wasn't decorative. It wasn't meant to be pretty. It demanded something more. It asked the viewer to remember, to question, to feel. A boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering, "Why does it look so real?" The mother, caught off guard by her own tears, could only shake her head. Malik paused for a moment, pulling back to study the form he had created. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if he had poured part of himself into the figure. The crowd waited, expecting him to speak, to explain, but he didn't. Words were not his medium. He let the silence, the strokes, the colors carry everything. He could not say aloud. A gust of wind rustled the papers by his feet, scattering a couple of sketches onto the sidewalk. A passerby bent to retrieve one and, upon seeing the detail within it, slipped a folded bill onto the pile. Before walking away, Malik glanced down, nodded quietly, and tucked the money into his pocket. He did not chase wealth. He chased truth, and so the city moved around him, a river of faces and stories, while Malik remained the still point, the artist in the golden light, painting not for fame or recognition, but because he had to, because it was the only way he knew how to exist. Few knew his name. Fewer still knew his story. But those who paused, even for a minute, carried a piece of his soul with them as they walked away. Malik never looked up to see them go. His brush was already moving again, creating another world on the fragile surface of paper, while the sun dipped closer to the horizon, wrapping him in a glow that made the ordinary seem sacred. The sun had slipped lower in the sky, its light sharpening into that golden, almost unreal hue that made everything look more beautiful than it really was. The crowd that had gathered around Malik began to thin. People moved on, caught up in errands and obligations in the constant pull of the city. Yet one figure lingered, hanging back near the edge of the semicircle, arms folded, eyes sharp-eyed. It was a boy 17, maybe 18, his pale skin flushed from the heat of the afternoon, his hair styled in a way that looked carefully careless. His name was Dylan. Unlike the others, he didn't just glance and move along. He stayed, studying Malik's every stroke with an intensity that was different. From the casual admiration of the passersby, his lips twitched, half in wonder, half in something else. Dylan had always been ambitious, always restless, the kind of boy who believed he was meant for something big, but could never quite find the thing that made him exceptional. He dabbled in everything: music, photography, even sketching, but his creations always fell flat, derivative shadows of someone else's work. He hated that about himself. He hated the empty feeling of looking at a blank page and knowing his mind had nothing truly original to offer. And so when he saw Malik's art, the rawness of it, the strange familiarity and otherworldliness woven together, something inside him tightened. Admiration, yes, but beneath it, Emmy bloomed like a dark flower. He stepped forward, breaking the silence between them. "That's incredible," Dylan said, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone used to being listened to. "I mean, the detail, it doesn't even look real. How do you do that?" Malik glanced at him briefly, then back at the canvas. Compliments were common, expected. He nodded politely, muttering a soft, "Thank you," before dipping his brush again. But Dylan didn't leave. He crouched slightly to see closer, as if trying to absorb every stroke. "Seriously, though, I've seen a lot of street art around the city, but this is on another level. Do you have a studio somewhere, or is this it?" Malik hesitated, not used to so many questions. Most people admired and moved on. "This is it," he said simply, his tone calm, almost dismissive. "Man," Dylan chuckled, shaking his head as if baffled. "You could be selling this for thousands, you know. Galleries, collectors, they'd eat this up. Why waste it out here on the street?" Malik smiled faintly at that, though it wasn't a smile of agreement. "Art isn't wasted if someone feels something from it," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Something flickered in Dylan's eyes, but he masked it quickly. He leaned in closer, pretending a casual interest, but every word Malik spoke, every idea he hinted at, Dylan tucked away greedily like stolen coins. The painting was nearly complete now, a figure draped in geometric shapes, its posture both regal and strange, as though it had stepped out of a history book from the future. Malik finally set the brush down and reached for a cloth to wipe his hands. Dylan seized the pause as an opening. "So, what's the idea behind this one?" Dylan asked, gesturing toward the canvas. "It feels, I don't know, different, like it belongs somewhere else." Malik rarely explained his work. Art, to him, was conversation without words, but something about the boy's persistence, his eagerness, his apparent fascination unlocked a sliver of generosity in him. Perhaps Malik thought the boy was another aspiring artist, hungry to learn. Perhaps he thought sharing the seed of an idea might inspire someone to water their own. "It's part of a series I'm planning," Malik said, his gaze still fixed on the figure he had painted. "I'm blending African heritage with futuristic visions, looking backward and forward at the same time. The past holds roots, and the future, it's the branches. I want to show both together." Dylan's eyebrows lifted. He nodded, almost too quickly, as though affirming he understood. But his heart raced with something darker than admiration. His mind was already spinning, weaving the words into something he could claim as his own. African heritage with futuristic visions. He repeated the phrase silently, committing it to memory, shaping it already into a pitch. "That's wow," Dylan said, his voice soft, careful not to betray the rush of excitement he felt. "That's genius. No one's doing that. Seriously, man, you're onto something huge." Malik shrugged, as though it didn't matter. though deep down, he hoped the work truly carried weight. "It's just an idea," he said. "Maybe one day it'll be more." Dylan's gaze lingered on him, on the calm, the humility, the way Malik spoke as though greatness wasn't already spilling from his hands. Dylan forced a smile, the kind of smile that masked the calculations churning in his mind. "Well," he said, patting the straps of his backpack, "keep at it. You've got something special here." He began to step back, blending into the thinning crowd, but as he walked away, his eyes glinted not with simple admiration, but with something sharper, hungrier. Malik returned to his work, unaware of what had just been set in motion. To him, Dylan had been just another passerby, another admirer curious enough to stay. He couldn't see the way Dylan's jaw tightened with determination, couldn't hear the silent vow forming in his thoughts. "If I can't create something new, I'll take it. I'll make it mine." The golden light dimmed in the evening, painting long shadows across the street. Malik dipped his brush again, working steadily, his soul flowing into the paper. He didn't know that a stranger had just walked away carrying not only admiration, but theft and ideas stolen in plain sight, wrapped in the disguise of innocent curiosity. And the city, alive and indifferent, kept moving, bearing witness to the moment without lifting a finger. The days that followed moved with the rhythm of the city, fast, loud, merciless. Malik kept painting, as he always did, his world stitched together by cheap brushes, half-empty jars of paint, and scraps of paper he could barely afford. To him, life was simple: create, breathe, survive. He had no time for the noise of the digital world. His art lived on concrete walls, in the hands of strangers, not on glowing screens. But the city has a way of carrying whispers. It started with a message from a neighbor's kid, who came running down the alley one afternoon, phone in hand. "Malik, look, isn't this yours?" The boy's voice carried excitement, not suspicion. He shoved the screen forward, revealing an image on social media. Malik squinted at the phone, the cracked glass reflecting the sun. His heart stumbled. The image was unmistakable. His figure, the fusion of heritage and futurism. The same colors, the same symbols carved into the body. It was his, yet it wasn't. The name beneath it read, Dylan Carter. At first, Malik said nothing. He blinked, as though perhaps the world had played a trick on him. But the caption sealed it: Dylan calling the piece his original vision, his new series. Already hashtagged with words Malik himself had once whispered aloud. Past, roots, future, branches. Malik's stomach tightened. He handed the phone back, muttering something about being tired. But his hand trembled as he picked up his brush again. That night, alone in his small rented room with peeling wallpaper and a bed that sagged in the middle, Malik searched the internet for the name Dylan Carter. The glow of the old laptop lit his face, highlighting the hollowness in his eyes as page after page revealed what had unfolded. Dylan's post had gone viral. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments praising his unique vision, artists reposting him, influencers calling him the voice of a new generation. And it didn't stop there. Malik scrolled, numb, as Dylan posed and polished photos with his series, standing confidently in front of canvases painted with Malik's stolen language. Invitations followed: an art gallery downtown, a feature in a cultural magazine, and finally, the announcement that made Malik's throat go dry. Dylan had been chosen to present his work on a televised competition for young creatives. Malik sat back, the laptop balanced on his knees, the hum of the old fan filling the silence. His chest felt hollow, like something essential had been scooped out of him. His ideas, born in sweat and solitude, had been ripped from his hands and polished until they gleamed, and the world, blind to their origin, applauded the thief. The betrayal cut deep. But Malik did not shout. He did not storm onto social media to prove his claim. He did not march into the galleries demanding justice. He simply closed the laptop and stared at the wall for a long time, the shadows of the evening crawling upward like vines. The mystery lingered like smoke in the air. Why doesn't he fight back? Perhaps Malik believed that truth, like paint, eventually surfaced no matter how many layers covered it. Perhaps he had grown too used to being overlooked, too familiar with silence to believe his voice would matter now. Or perhaps, deep inside, he feared that no one would believe him, that a poor street artist without a following could not stand against the gleaming image of a confident boy with the right look, the right words, the right privilege. Still, the hurt clung to him. Each night, Malik returned to his art, but his brush moved slower. He painted with the weight of betrayal pressing on his chest. His symbols, once a language of pride and vision, now stung like echoes stolen from his own mouth. When strangers stopped by to buy his sketches, he smiled politely, but the smile never reached his eyes. Meanwhile, Dylan soared. Videos of his confident interviews spread across the internet. His words, though shallow, were delivered with charm, and the world listened. He spoke about blending cultures, about visions of the future. Phrases pulled directly from Malik's late afternoon explanations, as though he had swallowed Malik's voice whole. Cameras loved him. His smile gleamed under the lights. Invitations multiplied. Doors opening that had never even been visible to Malik. The live television event loomed closer. Billboards announced it. Clips teased it online. Watch the brightest. Young artists share their visions of the future. Dylan's face appeared in ads, his name printed in bold letters, and still, Malik said nothing. He painted in the fading light of his cramped room, the sound of laughter and traffic drifting through the thin windows. Some nights he sat in silence, staring at his work, wondering if art mattered, when stolen dreams could be rewarded more than original voices. When the evening of the competition arrived, Malik did not try to stop it. He didn't show up at the studio, nor did he send angry emails or messages. Instead, he sat on the edge of his bed, the glow of his small television flickering in the dark. The studio lights on the screen were blinding, dazzling, so far removed from his own dim space. And there, in the center of it all, stood Dylan, confident, smiling, a canvas at his side that Malik recognized as though he himself had painted it. Malik's heart twisted. Every symbol, every color was his, and yet, in the eyes of the crowd, it belonged to someone else. He watched silently, jaw tight, hands clasped between his knees. His chest ached, not just from betrayal, but from helplessness. The world applauded. Dylan cheered for him, crowned him a visionary. Malik turned the volume down, the sound of his own breathing loud in the silence. He did not speak, even to himself, but behind his eyes, something burned, a quiet storm that neither Dylan nor the cameras could see. The mystery deepened. Why did Malik remain silent? Was it resignation, or was it patience? The answer was hidden, waiting, like paint beneath the surface of a canvas. The night of the television show arrived with all the glitter and noise that Malik's world had never known. In a city where most people hurried past him without a glance, here was a stage drenched in light so bright it could blind. The studio buzzed with anticipation, audience members filling their seats, cameras panning across excited faces, producers whispering last-minute instructions into headsets. At the center of it all stood Dylan. He wore a crisp shirt that gleamed under the lights, his hair neatly styled, his smile wide but rehearsed. In his hands, he held a canvas, a piece painted with Malik's soul, though no one in the room knew it. Back in his small apartment, Malik sat on the edge of his bed, the glow of the television illuminating his tired face. His body was tense, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles whitened. He couldn't turn away, though each image felt like a blade against his chest. Ladies and gentlemen, the host's voice boomed across the studio and into Malik's room. Please welcome Dylan Carter, one of our most promising young artists. The audience erupted in applause. Dylan stepped forward, confidence radiating from every movement. He set the canvas on its stand and turned toward the judges. The piece shimmered under the lights, those same symbols Malik had once explained. On the street, those same colors that had poured from his brush in the fading sunlight. The host gestured toward the painting. Dylan, tell us about your work. What does this piece mean to you? Dylan took a breath and began to speak. His words flowed easily at first, smooth and polished, like a student who had memorized his notes. This work, he said, is about blending the past with the future. It's about roots and branches, about looking backward to see where we come from, while also looking forward to imagine what's possible. Malik's chest tightened. Those were his words, almost verbatim, stripped of their weight, drained of their meaning. Dylan repeated them like slogans, his voice steady but hollow. The audience nodded, impressed by the eloquence, unaware of how empty it truly was. But then, one of the judges leaned forward, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice like steel softened by velvet. She had been quiet until now, listening carefully. She tilted her head, studying the canvas with the precision of someone who had seen too many imitations. Dressed as originality, you've spoken about vision, she said slowly, her words cutting through the applause. But tell me this, Dylan, what Inspire the symbolism here. These shapes, these markings, what do they mean to you personally? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Dylan blinked, his smile faltering for the first time. Well, he began, clearing his throat. The symbols, they represent culture, you know, like identity and, connection. His words stumbled, clumsy now, stripped of the practiced charm. He glanced at the judges, then at the audience, as if searching for approval, for rescue. His hand lifted toward the canvas, but hovered uncertainly, like a student called to explain a lesson he had only half heard. The judge's gaze sharpened. Yes, but what culture? Whose identity? And how does it connect to your own life? Dylan's throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but nothing coherent came out. Well, it's universal, really. Like, it doesn't belong to one group. It's for everyone. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The words rang false, evasive. The ease of his earlier speech cracked, revealing the emptiness beneath. Malik watched from his room, his jaw tense. The silence between Dylan's stutters was louder than any applause. He could see it happening, the unraveling, the moment when the mask begins to slip. Dylan tried again, his voice thinner now. I just think it's important to honor history, you know, while also, pushing forward. But the phrasing sounded rehearsed, recycled. His eyes darted nervously, his shoulders shifting under the weight of the gaze fixed on him. The audience, once charmed, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some whispered, others crossed their arms, brows furrowed. The other judges exchanged glances. One leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. Another tapped a pen against the desk, the rhythm sharp and unforgiving. The host, sensing the tension, stepped in with a forced smile. Very thoughtful. Dylan, he said quickly, trying to smooth over the cracks. Perhaps you can expand on that later. For now, let's give him another round of applause. The clapping came, but it was hesitant this time, scattered, polite rather than enthusiastic. Dylan forced a smile, but sweat glistened on his forehead. His hands gripped the edge of the stand, fingers digging into the wood. For the first time since stepping onto that stage, he looked small, like a boy caught playing dress-up in a costume too heavy for his shoulders. And far away, in the dim light of his room, Malik's expression remained unreadable. He did not smile at Dylan's struggle, nor did he turn away. He simply watched, his dark eyes steady, as though waiting for something inevitable. The night was not over. The cracks had appeared, and once cracks appear, it is only a matter of time before the whole structure begins to collapse. The studio air was thick with unease. Dylan's smile, once so radiant under the heat of the spotlights, had grown stiff, brittle, like glass ready to shatter. The audience clapped out of politeness, but their murmurs betrayed doubt. The judges, faces, sharp and unreadable, gave nothing away except for the faint edge of suspicion glimmering in their eyes. Then, just as Dylan shifted on his feet, preparing to mask his stumble with more rehearsed lines, the giant screen above the stage flickered. The lights dimmed, the sound hushed, and the audience fell into an anticipatory silence. Before we continue, the host announced, his voice unusually solemn, we've received a video package submitted anonymously that sheds light on one of tonight's presentations. Let's take a look. Dylan's head snapped toward the screen, his brow furrowing in confusion. Anonymous. His palms began to sweat. The footage came alive with grainy images. It wasn't polished or staged. It was raw, caught by someone's shaky phone camera. The first frame revealed a familiar corner of the city, a brick wall splashed with murals, children running past, and the low hum of street life. And there, framed by the late afternoon sun, stood Malik. The audience gasped in unison, a sharp intake of breath that cut through the silence. On screen, Malik's hands moved with precision, his brush dancing across the canvas. Every stroke was purposeful, alive, charged with something the television lights could never manufacture. His body leaned into the work, sweat glistening on his brow, his eyes burning with focus. The video shifted angles, showing the sketches at his feet, faces, figures, patterns. Among them, unmistakable designs, the same symbols, the same futuristic forms. The very language Dylan had paraded as his own. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, rising into waves of disbelief. Wait, that's the same piece. He stole it. Oh my God, it's identical. The judges exchanged sharp, knowing glances. One leaned forward, his jaw tightening. Another whispered something under her breath, her expression cold with dawning realization. Dylan's face drained of color. The confident glow he had carried moments earlier evaporated, replaced by sheer panic. His throat went dry, his chest constricted. The spotlight that once felt like a crown now burned into him like fire. On screen, the montage continued. More clips of Malik working, more evidence. A close-up of a sketch revealed the same triangular motifs now painted on Dylan's canvas. Another showed Malik explaining softly to a passerby, "It's about heritage and the future, about roots and branches." The very words Dylan had repeated, stripped bare, exposed as theft. The audience erupted in noise, gasps, whispers, even boos. The polite applause from earlier was forgotten. Drowned under the wave of indignation, the host, clearly caught off guard, glanced nervously at the judges. But the judges weren't nervous. Their eyes were steel. One of them, the woman who had pressed Dylan earlier, turned back toward him. Her voice cut like ice. "Dylan, would you like to explain this?" The boy's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His lips trembled. He stammered, searching for excuses, for words that wouldn't come. That's not. But every attempt crumbled before it could take shape. The judges weren't buying it. The audience wasn't buying it. And worst of all, Dylan knew the cameras weren't buying it. Millions of viewers at home were watching him unravel in real time. Sweat slid down his temple. His hands trembled as he clutched the edge of the canvas, as though he could somehow anchor himself to it. His carefully constructed image was collapsing, brick by brick, under the weight of truth. On screen, Malik kept painting, unaware he was being recorded. The video ended on a shot of his quiet smile as he handed a sketch to a child. The kind of moment no one could fake. The screen went black, but the silence it left behind was deafening. The host cleared his throat, but his voice carried no rescue. This time, well, it seems we've been presented with very compelling evidence. The audience roared, now not in support, but in outrage. Words like fraud and liar echoed through the studio. Dylan's eyes darted wildly, as if searching for an escape route. But there was nowhere to run. Every camera was trained on him, every face turned against him. His composure collapsed entirely, shoulders slumping, his boyish charm gone. He looked younger now, smaller, stripped of the confidence he had stolen. Along with Malik's art dot and far away, in his dim little apartment, Malik sat frozen before the television. His heart pounded, his breath shallow. He hadn't expected this. He had never sent the footage, never sought revenge. Yet here it was, the truth, projected larger than life, undeniable. He leaned back slowly, exhaling the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He wasn't smiling, not yet, but in his chest, something shifted, a weight lifting, if only slightly. On stage, Dylan's silence became his confession. The boy who had basked in stolen light now stood exposed, naked in his dishonesty, and as the audience's anger swelled, the judges sat in judgment not of the art, but of the artist's integrity. For the first time since stepping under the studio lights, Dylan had no performance left to give. The silence in the studio was thick, pulsing like a held breath. Dylan stood under the lights, pale and sweating, the once celebrated prodigy now reduced to a trembling shadow of himself. His hands clutched the edge of his canvas as though the painted surface might shield him, but the evidence was undeniable. The screen had shown the truth, and the truth had teeth. The host shifted uncomfortably, his smile brittle, eyes darting toward the producers in the wings. But before he could fill the silence with hollow words, the camera panned slowly across the audience, and there he was, Malik. He sat quietly in the very back row, half hidden in the dim shadows beyond the stage lights. His arms were crossed loosely over his chest, his posture calm, unshaken, his expression steady, not triumphant, not smug, just present. His dark eyes reflected neither vengeance nor satisfaction, only a depth the audience hadn't seen in Dylan's. Hollow rehearsals. The murmur swelled, people turned, pointing, whispering. The realization rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. This is the real artist. The host cleared his throat, seizing the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice tinged with awe now. "It seems we have someone very important with us tonight. Malik, would you please join us on stage?" The spotlight shifted, cutting through the darkness and landing on Malik. For a moment he remained still, his face unreadable. Then, quietly, he rose from his seat. His movements were unhurried, unforced. as if he were stepping into no more than another evening on the street, brush in hand, paper taped to a wall. The crowd parted for him as he walked down the aisle. People leaned back in their chairs, some reaching out to pat his shoulder as he passed, others bowing their heads in respect. The applause began tentatively, scattered at first, then growing louder with every step he took toward the stage. Dylan watched in horror as Malik approached. The contrast was jarring. Dylan in his crisp shirt, trembling, drenched in sweat. Malik, in his simple, worn clothes, his sneakers scuffed from the pavement, yet carrying himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had never needed a spotlight to shine. When Malik stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent again. He stood beside Dylan, their frames outlined by the same relentless light, but the difference between them was as stark as truth against lies. Dylan's hands twitched nervously at his sides, while Malik stood still, composed, his presence filling the space without effort. The host, almost reverent now, held the microphone toward him. "Malik," he said softly, "is there anything you'd like to say?" Malik's gaze swept the room once, taking in the judges, the audience, the cameras broadcasting this moment to countless unseen homes. Then he turned his eyes briefly toward Dylan, just long enough to acknowledge him, but not long enough to wound him. There was no malice there, no gloating, only clarity. He spoke, his voice calm, low but carrying. "Art isn't just about strokes on canvas," he said. "It's about truth." The words seemed to hover in the air, weighty and undeniable. The audience leaned forward, listening. "You can steal ideas," Malik continued, his tone steady, "but you can't steal the soul behind them. You can copy lines, colors, symbols, but if they don't come from you, they'll always be hollow, empty." Dylan's eyes dropped to the floor, his shoulders curling inward as though the words themselves pressed down on him. Malik glanced once more at the canvas's canvas, though touched by another's hand. He shook his head slightly, not in anger, but in quiet mourning for what had been twisted. Then he looked back at the audience, his arms still folded loosely, his voice unwavering. "Art is more than performance, more than applause. It's a reflection of who we are, our history, our pain, our hope. That's something you can't fake, no matter how bright the lights are." For a moment, the studio was silent, a stillness so complete it felt sacred. Then, like the breaking of a dam, the applause erupted. It rolled across the studio like thunder, rising and rising until the sound was deafening. People leapt to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even shouting his name. The judges joined in, their stern faces softened now with respect. The cameras swung wildly, capturing the eruption of emotion. Malik stood in the middle of it all, unmoved by the frenzy. He did not raise his arms in victory, did not bask in the roar of validation. He simply stood, grounded and calm, allowing the truth to speak louder than any performance ever could. Beside him, Dylan shrank into himself, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The spotlight that once felt like a crown now scorched him with exposure. He had wanted the world's attention, and now he had it, but not for the reasons he dreamed. As the applause roared on, Malik finally exhaled, slow and steady, like a man releasing a weight he had carried for too long. He had not asked for this stage, but now that it had found him, he used it not for revenge, but for truth, and the world, at last, listened. The applause lingered long after Malik's words faded. It wasn't the kind of applause that chased spectacle or showmanship. It was deeper, born of recognition, of truth landing squarely in the hearts of those who heard it. The sound seemed to stretch on, a wave crashing over Dylan's trembling frame and washing Malik in a light he had never sought, but had always deserved. When the ovation finally softened, the camera zoomed in one last time on the two figures who had come to embody more than just art, the thief and the truth bearer. Dylan stood defeated, his eyes hollow, his lips pressed into a thin line as though even breathing had become difficult. Under the weight of shame, Malik, on the other hand, remained steady, his body still, his face calm. He had said all he needed to say. His silence now was louder than Dylan's stuttering had ever been. The host stepped forward, his polished charisma dimmed by the gravity of the moment. For once, he didn't try to spin the narrative, didn't try to lighten the atmosphere with charm. He simply lifted the microphone and said, with a voice hushed by respect, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we've witnessed something rare. Not just art, but truth." The audience erupted once more, the sound rising into something that felt less like entertainment and more like a reckoning. Far away, in living rooms across the city, Families watched the broadcast in silence, some with tears glistening in their eyes. Parents pointed at Malik and whispered to their children about honesty, about courage, about integrity. In cafes and bars where televisions played, people leaned closer, conversations pausing as Malik's words replayed in their minds. You can steal ideas, but you can't steal the soul behind them. Back in his small apartment, Malik returned later, that night, to the quiet that had always been his companion. The crowd's roar was gone, the camera switched off, the lights extinguished. He sat on his narrow bed, shoes still on, staring at the familiar cracks in his ceiling. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been real, the studio, the applause, the confrontation. But then he looked at his hands, still stained faintly with pain, and he knew. The truth had finally spoken louder than lies. Malik didn't think of victory or of revenge or of fame. He thought of the children who had watched, the young dreamers who might believe now that their voices mattered, even if they whispered from the shadows. He thought of the neighbors who had seen him painting on the corner, who would nod tomorrow with a quiet pride. And he thought of Dylan not with bitterness, but with the heavy knowledge that sometimes people lose themselves chasing glory, forgetting that imitation can never carry the weight of authenticity. Injustice had risen like fire, scorching everything in its path, but truth, slow and patient, had cut through the smoke. Weeks later, Malik still painted in the same streets. The sun still dipped low, casting its golden light across his canvas, and strangers still stopped to admire. But now, more people recognized him. Some brought friends, pointing at him with awe, whispering, "That's him, the one from the show." Others simply nodded in respect, as though acknowledging not just his art, but his endurance. He didn't chase galleries or cameras. He didn't need to. His work was its own testimony. He painted not to prove himself, but because it was who he was, what he had always been. And though his pockets remained light, his spirit carried something Dylan's stolen fame never could. Integrity. As for Dylan, his name faded quickly. Scandals burned bright, but short. The same platforms that had once praised him now turned cold, critical, mocking. The invitations stopped coming. His face, once plastered across screens, disappeared into obscurity, and though he tried to resurface with new attempts, the shadow of his betrayal followed him everywhere. People could forgive mistakes, but they rarely forgot deception. The world moved on, but the lesson lingered. Because Malik's story was no longer just his own. It belonged to every artist whose voice had been stolen, every worker whose labor had gone uncredited, every soul overlooked in favor of someone louder, shinier, but hollow. His quiet dignity became a mirror, reflecting the truth people too often ignored. Greatness has nothing to do with applause, and everything to do with authenticity. And so the story closed not with Malik triumphant, nor Dylan destroyed, but with a truth carved into memory. Injustice, like fire, can roar and consume, blinding the eyes and choking the air. But truth, steady, persistent, will always find its way through the smoke, no matter how thick. Authenticity outlives imitation. Integrity is the true mark of greatness. And Malik, the quiet painter in the golden light, had proved it not with rage or revenge, but with the one thing Dylan could never steal: his soul.